My name is Don Ramsey. I'm a solutions consultant with Binary Stream. I've been an accountant for about 30 years. I've been everything from a CFO to a CIO to a frontline consultant for GP. So I know a little bit about the finance aspect of things, and hopefully I can answer most of your questions if you have any at the end of the presentation. What we're going to walk through today in the next 45 minutes is basically an overview of how you can take GP in a single SQL database. And if you're using GP currently, you recognize that you can typically have one company per database. If you're about to move to GP, then you need to know that if you've got multiple companies that you're running now, you're going to need multiple databases if you want to use the standard functionality of GP. With multi-entity management, what we've done about 15 years ago or so is we developed a way that we can manage many companies in a single SQL database running a single GP instance, which makes it very powerful for doing things like consolidated financial reporting, managing the vendors and the customers for many companies, but only in one database. And what you're going to see is how they're actually going to be in there once, and yet multi-entity management will keep track of all the back end. The other thing I hope you notice that, especially if you're already somewhat used to GP, you're used to these kinds of windows. If I look at my financial page here, you're going to see the typical GP structure. I've got a transactions box and a cards box and a reports box. And as I go through each module, they all look very familiar. When I get down to multi-entity management, it's going to look somewhat familiar to you as well. And there's a logical reason for that. That reason is that we have coded multi-entity management for GP in Dexterity, which is the coding of GP. What it basically means for you is it's plug and play. Once you've got it configured and up and running, there is no eConnect or Smart Connect or Scribe or anything else required. There's no daily downloads. As you do your day-to-day activities, multi-entity will keep track of all the transactions and make sure they're ascribed to the proper company, and then your balance sheets and your P&Ls are automatically accurate as you are in inputting the information. Now, typically when you're going from GP in an instance from one database or one company to another, you see this drop down. And then, of course, you only see one company called Fabricam, which is the demo environment for Microsoft Dynamics GP. If I had many companies, I would have a list, 5 or 6, 8 different companies showing up here, and I would click on the one I want, and basically GP would log me out of one SQL database, log me into another SQL database, and away I go to work. We had one client who told us, quite frankly, that was costing them a full-time equivalent in a salary every year in lost time because all of their GP users were in and out of multiple companies each day. So it was very disconcerting for them and slowed the work process up dramatically. With us, we're going to cancel this window, and we're never going to go down there again as we walk through this particular demo. If I wanted to move between companies within a GP database using MEM, I could pop up here. I could either type in a number or go take a peek, pick the company I want, double-click it, and say OK. And you notice now it says up here in the top left, San Francisco. I was in head office. But you might have noticed that absolutely nothing happened with the GP window. That's pretty powerful because what it means is GP itself didn't do anything. It thinks it's running one company in a single database. All MEM did was just drop me down to a different pointer, if you will, in a table saying, hey, what you do now is going to default to company 600. I want to go back to company 0. I can just type it in, hit OK. I'm back at my head office. Now, as I said down here for Fabricam, I will not touch this icon up here again either. I will not move from company to company in my master login logout screen, if you will, for multi-entity. I'm going to do it simply by doing my day-to-day activity. So as long as I'm a user who has been given access to all the companies, I'm going to be able to move around in those companies as I go from screen to screen. And we're going to take a look at that in just a couple of minutes. First, let's take a look at the basic overview for multi-entity. Now keep in mind, this is if you've got a series of companies. Right now you're running them in multiple databases. You're finding that to be a little bit expensive in ROI, but also a little bit difficult because of moving back and forth and trying to get consolidated financials. This is the tool that can help you eliminate all of those problems. Multi-entity is based on a segment in your chart of accounts. So if I take a look here at the main setup window up top, I see entity label, which I've called company. Therefore, you see company segment instead of entity segment. And my department label, I've called it cost center. So now you see cost center instead of department. But the big thing is this. See, I got segment 1 and segment 3. If I go click on that and expand and take a look, this is my chart of accounts in Fabricam. Now in GP, you might already be aware, you can have 10 segments in a chart of accounts. I personally have never seen that. I think I've seen 7 max, but you can have 10, and you can have up to 66 characters. Now, of the segments, we don't care which one you pick to represent your company. It just so happens, rather, that I picked segment 1 to represent my company, and I picked segment 3 to represent my cost center, because segment 2, with the installation of GP financials, is basically my natural account. So I certainly don't want to touch it and make it a company or a cost center. So once I've done that, I would normally say okay, but in this case I'll just bump out so I don't change it. Segment 1 and segment 3 from now on are tracked by multi-entity management. And what it will do, as you'll see later on, is that it will watch the first segment, in my case, of every single transaction, every distribution line, and it will watch and see if the company segment is correct. So if I'm working in company 0 and the segment by default is company 4, it will change that segment of that purchase account to company 0. And you'll see there are settings and configurations that you can play with to make it very, very specific for your company. It's not complicated, but it's very, very flexible. So now when I get down here, you see that it says modules. Well, multi-entity is modular based. So if I want just the basic core of multi-entity, it will manage me for GP financials, GP bank rec, AP, accounts payable, and accounts receivable. What it won't handle in the core is purchase order processing, sales order processing, etc. Those are different modules. But if you're not using those modules, there's no purpose in you paying for them, so you don't buy them. You only buy what you need. So as you see from the module list here, there's a lot of choices, and away you go. You pick what you need, and you walk off and start doing your business. The rest of this, basically a bunch of security windows, substitution windows, all you notice, check boxes, maybe the odd letter here and there, maybe the odd radio button. I think in purchasing there is a couple of radio buttons. What this is telling us is how specifically do I want multi-entity management to work with my GP installation. For example, I may want to have my vendor security in place so that each company gets assigned the rights to use a vendor. That doesn't mean the vendors are mutually exclusive. It just simply means, say I've got vendor A and I only want company 1 and 2 to use it. Well, I can set it so only company 2 sees that vendor, or 1 and 2, pardon me. Or I can have all the companies see that vendor. Or I can have a select portion of companies see that vendor. Whatever I want. All the other checkboxes here work the same way. It limits who can see inventory items, who can see customers, who can see inventory sites. What about doing transactions in the GL, or even the GL accounts themselves? Who gets to see them? You can set that kind of security if you want to be that tight in your security. A couple of other things to show you. If I want to close individual modules, in GP, as you know, you can close purchasing, and you can close inventory, and you can close sales, and you can close financial. Well, you can do that because it's one company. Well, we've developed it now just recently, as a matter of fact, where I can also close all my different companies in the GP database. I can close purchasing for each and every one of them. I can close receivables or sales for each and every one of them. And I can also close inventory and financial for each and every one of the companies. So it gives you a lot of control if you're the head accountant or you're the CFO and you really want to control who's doing what in the companies at month end or year end. You've got that ability now to lock them down by functional module per entity within a single GP database. So once you set all this up, you hit OK, and then MEM takes over and keeps looking for that first segment. Now, as we walk down here, you're going to find we're going to get more and more specific with all the configuration and setting. We're not going to take too long at this because we want to get into some actual transactions so you see how it works. But first thing you need to know is because GP thinks this is a single database, we need to have some way to set up security by user. So using the same logins that you come with GP, same tasks and roles, I'm the SA, I'm the system administrator, so it kind of makes sense that I have access to all companies, and I do. But what if I was a manager who was in charge of 3 stores? Well, this manager's got in charge of New York, Miami, and Dallas. When this particular individual signs in, they will never see head office, Denver, LA, or San Francisco. They'll never know they exist. They can't do transactions. Depending on your security, they won't be able to see the GL accounts for them. They won't be able to do inquiries. They won't be able to run reports, whether those reports be within GP or in SSRS reporting or in Management Reporter. It all respects the security of the implementation of multi-entity management. So I can set everybody up however way I want, as you see, different areas of responsibility for each person. And when they log in, they're going to see the drop down showing the companies that they've been given access to by whoever you put in charge of admin for your MEM installation. Now, a couple of things you have to have. One of them is you must have a complete set of do, to, do, froms from MEM. So here I've got 1 to 6 of my companies. There's 0 included because I'm working on 0. If I scroll through these, you'll see I have a complete set of do, to, do, froms or intercompany accounts for all the companies in my database. I've used 1240 and 2240 as the natural, but you don't have to do that. You can use whatever you like when you set it up. But just keep that in mind as we walk through an actual couple of transactions. So once I've done that, I say, okay, multi-entity will now take over handling all the intercompany portion of every transaction, and it will guarantee you that it's always going to be right as long as your data input is right. In other words, no user error. The other thing I want to show you is that you can disable multi-entity in certain areas. And you notice I got a little checkbox here. Let's go find that particular item. This box says disable account substitution. Multi-entity works by substituting the company segment of your chart of accounts with the correct company segment depending on what company you're working in. Well, what if you want to do centralized payroll, or payables, pardon me? Well, you don't want the payables portion to change. You don't want multi-entity to pick out the right company segment for the payables account because I'm going to pay all my bills from head office. Therefore, I want all the payables to go in head office balance sheet. So when I cut my checks, I reduce head office cash, I reduce head office payables. There are no do, to, do, froms to worry about, and everything is perfect. Well, I just checked that little box right there which says, hey, every time I run a payables invoice, do not touch the company segment of the payables piece of the distribution. Leave it alone. And as you can see by scrolling down, you've got a lot of flexibility if you wanted to disable certain activity for multi-entity. Some folks will disable the gains and losses because they want it all to go on the head office or the main administrative company. So they'll make sure all those go there and they don't go in the individual subsidiaries. But your choice. I'm going to leave it for centralized payables, and I'll just say okay, and away I go. Other than that, the rest of this is pretty obvious. If I've got multiple companies running in a single GP database, I'm going to need multiple checkbooks. And sure enough, I do. There's my head office 00. It's got a couple of checkbooks. Company 1's got a couple, company 2, and so on and so forth. You can have as many checkbooks per company or as few as you want. And therefore, I have to have also addresses. So I've got address here for company 0, and I could keep on going and find addresses for all the other companies, bill to, ship to, 1099s, even tax schedules, if I wanted to get down to that detail and attach that to the companies. I can also have logos. I don't have any myself in here, but I can have a logo for each company. Think of check printing. I've got the logos for the different companies. I got the company names in here. I've got the company addresses in here. I can have the software program pick up the proper MICR, stamp it on your blank checks, and away you go. You don't have to worry about it whatsoever. Everything gets picked up by what you've configured in here. If you need federal ID numbers for all your companies, we've provided that capability so you can add those federal ID numbers in, and things like 1099 reports will automatically come back to this table, pick up the correct numbers, and away they go. So very, very powerful. We've tried to think of everything you would have to have in a single database and added that capability and functionality here for multiple companies running in that single database. If I run through the rest of these things, which we won't do now, that'll put you to sleep, and I don't want to do that. These are all more and more detailed setup instructions for each of the modules individually. So you get to talk that over with your partner and us and say, hey, here's exactly what I want multi-entity to do, exactly how I want it to function, and we either check off or uncheck the proper boxes, put in the proper initials, hit the right radio buttons, and then we go. Now, once we are done in here, we can leave multi-entity management, and you never have to go back unless you change the way you work. You do not do, in standard MEM, you do not do any transactions in here. All right? You should not have to go in here for anything unless you're doing something a little outside the box and need to make a little fix every once in a while. But let's go to purchasing. Let's actually look at something in action now. We'll take a simple transaction entry. Now here is where the power of amendment really comes in. You'll notice that up here in the far left, I've got entity 000 head office. So by default, everything I do is going to go to head office. But let's say I'm walking through a pile of invoices as the payables clerk, and I'm doing head office, head office, head office, head office. And all of a sudden I come across, oh, this is for company 5. What am I going to do? Well, let's try this. I'm now working in Company 5, LA. So when I look at my vendors for Company 5, remember the security I set up? Look at them all. Man, I got all sorts of vendors. I think I got all of them that I have access to. But what if I say, no, I didn't mean to work in Company 5. I meant to work in Company 0 still. Let's go back there. And now look at the vendor list. Come back to only the vendors that were assigned originally to Company 0. Keep in mind, I'm the system administrator. I can go back in and give myself all vendors if I want. But when I'm working in a transaction window, I cannot overrule the configuration settings. Unless I'm the administrator of MEM, I'm stuck with these particular vendors to work with. So I'll pick one, and we'll do $1,000. This is a typical distribution we're going to look at. So before I open up the distribution window, we should expect to see something very, very obvious. I'm working in Company 0 in the transaction. By default, I'm in Company 0 anyway. Now, I've said that I'm doing centralized payables, so I should see the payable portion of this transaction automatically going to Company 0. And the expense portion. And nothing too dramatic here. I mean, there's my Company 000 for the purchase portion, and there's 000 for the payable, which I expect to see. But here's where it gets interesting. You might look at this and say, well, MEM didn't do anything, or did it? Let's go take a look at the default purchase account. Remember, my vendors are only in my database once, but I've got 6 companies, and they're all using this vendor. So when I go look at the default GL accounts, my accounts payable is great. It's 0002100, but my purchases account is 465.20. But yet over here, it says 000. And the reason it does is because this is where MEM has stepped in now and said, hey, you're working in Company 000. The transaction window says Company 000. I'm overwriting that 400 with the zeros. Therefore, the expense will go to the appropriate company. So the only way you're going to get an error is if you accidentally are working in the wrong company. You didn't mean to be in 000. So human error we haven't fixed yet. But there you go. So now, let's make it more complex. Let's take this, make that $500. Let's add another company. And I'll use the same purchases account only because I know it exists. So bear with me on that. All right, so now I have got my same $1,000. Nothing has changed there, but I've got Company 0. Oh, notice Company 1 and Company 2. And now, automatically, I've got all my due to, do froms. Perfectly balanced, still adding up to the $1,000. Now, here's what's interesting. Let's say that I'm looking at this distribution. I think, oh, you know what? This isn't right. This should have been 400. Let's fix that. And this should be 350. There, that's the proper distribution. Well, if I tab through here, or I was to go and save it, whatever I want to do, my due to, do from just got changed to $350 on both lines. Perfectly balanced. All together add up to 0, but there's amounts due back and forth between individual companies. You will have the comfort of knowing that they're always correct as long as you have put in the correct information at the very beginning of the transaction. One other thing to take a note of, if the person who gets in here is perhaps a junior accountant, not really a seasoned expert yet, they may look at this and say, wait a minute, why does that say 200? You know what? I'm in Company 0. That's Company 0. Let's fix it. I'm going to get a raise. Well, yeah, you might get a raise out the door. I know from my personal experience that this can be a nightmare because once I post this transaction, which theoretically I could because it balances, my due to the froms are now out of whack. But if I tab off this last line, watch what happens to that first segment. Instantly back to 200. You've told multi-entity to do its job. Multi-entity is going to do its job and you're not going to stop it. It will always make sure your transactions add up. And it doesn't matter, folks, if you're bringing this information in through a Scribe or a Smart Connect or an eConnect or some other integration manager. Doesn't matter where you're bringing information into your system. Once MEM sees a batch, sees a transaction, it goes and looks at it, analyzes it, determines whether or not it needs some due to the froms, and populates them automatically for you. You never have to think about it again. So that's very powerful there. You can also turn around. Now keep in mind, I've got this distribution of $1,000 3 ways. I could also add this. We've added the capability of allocation accounts at the purchasing and receiving level. Now think what that means. I get an invoice for a phone bill for all my companies, or power bill or insurance bill or whatever it might be. I want to post that transaction, but I want everyone to take their share. Well, if I look at this many accounts here, allocation, I've got 0, 1, and 2. I got cost center 10, 0. I've got 3 different natural accounts, and I've got a 60, 10, 30 breakout. So in other words, 100% allocated. So if I save that and then go down and take a look at my distributions, I've got 60, 30, 10 breakout, all the due to from's already populated, functional total's gone up simply because of using the allocation account, and there I am. Automatically taken care of, all the expenses spread out amongst for all the companies, the way you've got it broken out. And let's say for this particular transaction, I don't want it that way. I don't want it 60, 40, 10 or 60, 30, 10. I can simply change it here now. For this transaction only, I can now have a 50, 20, 30. I could change account numbers. I can do anything I like, post it. When I go back to use that allocation account again, it's back to the default of 60, 10, and 30. Very, very powerful tool that way. Now, let's say that we have done some transactions for multiple companies and we're now into bill paying mode. Often happens when you've got vendors. So there's a standard select payables check window. You notice the big grayed out area? That's because I've said centralized. Assuming now I'm a payables clerk that has an access to all the companies so that I can pay all the bills, I can just go in now and create a batch, go in and check all the companies, all the invoices, pay whatever I like, and it gets paid. If I'm doing it decentralized, where every company is going to pay their own bills, I can come in here and say, you know what, today I'm just going to do head office in Miami. Or maybe I'll add Denver to that. Oh, heck, you know what, I'm going to do them all. Yeah, how many do I got? One customer of ours has 700, so that's why it's asking this question. Are you sure? Yep. So I can do them all. Doesn't matter how you break it out. You don't have to go out of this window, over here to head office, or down here to Fabricam to cut your checks for all companies. I can just simply go like this. Let's actually open a batch and edit it so you see what I did to create these batches. Okay, so I've got a 0-central batch. Because I'm doing centralized payroll, or payables rather, it's coming out of my first bank, which is my head office bank account. You notice I got all the vendors that are been doing business with all my companies, and over here I got company 0, see the little column on the far right? I've got company 1, I've got company 2 down here, and I could have company 5 and 6, it doesn't matter, and I can select anything I want to pay, makes no difference. When I hit OK, it's going to create a check batch for me called 100-central. It's going to cut it out of first bank, and it's going to take all that money and pay the bills out of head office cash and reduce head office payables. No due to froms. Perfect. But what if I was doing decentralized? Well, I could still have a window that would look very much like this. All my companies would still show up. But when I went to say OK and create these batches, it would not create one batch. It would create, in my case, 7 batches looking much like this. 100 decentral, 0 decentral, 2 decentral, 3 decentral, 4 decentral, and each batch would have its appropriate bank account attached, and each batch would only have the vendors and the invoices for the company that they're paying. So here you notice just company 100, so there'd be 7 batches in my case, each to their own bank account, all adding up to what would have been decentralized. Your choice how you do it. Again though, no due to froms, because if I've said I'm doing decentralized payables, all these payables went to 100 payable, the next one went to 200 payable, the next one went to 300 payable, it's a wash, and I cut my check. The rest of the process, edit batch, edit check, print checks, post checks, just GP processing. There's nothing to think about or be concerned with MEM doing the job there. So hopefully you can see by now that it's very, very much just doing your job. There's not a lot to learn. There's a couple of little extra windows on some of the standard GP screens, but you just do your job. Just have to know if you're working in the right company for that window. But we're doing one vendor in the database, but we can have many companies. How do we track or keep separate all the activity that's happening for that vendor? Well, here's Ace Travel. Let's say, you notice once again, should be getting familiar to the demo, we've added the box that says here's all the companies you have access to. Which one do you want to look at? Well, I just want to look at company 200, so it redisplay. All I see here on the right, where I've got my company box in place, is just company 200. There's nothing else down there. Well, maybe I want to see company 200 and 400. Hit redisplay, and now I've got 200 and 400. Nothing else down there. Well, maybe I want to see them all. So we'll do the same thing once more. Now, we've got all companies highlighted. I've got all the activity down here. So let's just walk through what's happening here just quickly. GP is saying, hey, I've got a single company database. I've got this one vendor called Ace Travel. He's only in my database once. I've got $406,000 owed to this particular vendor. And down here is all the body of work. I've got all the invoices, the payments, all the transactions that are affecting this particular vendor that are still outstanding, or in history in my case. I got history checked off as well. So I've got these all sorted out here. And Mem is saying, yes, that's correct. You do owe $406,000, and you do have all this activity. However, we've kept track of the fact that you owe head office owes, $170, New York owes 64, Miami owes 34, Dallas owes 40. All of these totals here for all of your companies in the drop-down list add up to 406, 435, and 98 cents. So you see, Mem lets GP do its thing. In the background, Mem keeps track of all the activity that needs to be divided so you can get reports by company for the vendors and the customers and all the transactions that take place. It does it for you. What I think is a pretty powerful tool as well is I might get a call from Ace Travel. I mean, we owe them $400,000, right? They might say, listen, I sent you an invoice 3 or 4 months ago. Where's the money? I haven't been paid yet. Your clerk says, well, what company? The response is, I don't know. I sent it to your head office. Okay. Well, maybe if I have 50 companies, that could be a bit of a pain. But obviously, you could say to the person, well, you must have the invoice number in front of you, correct? And they say, yes, it's invoice 600-9. Well, let me see if I can, oh, there it is. Company 6. I go look at the document. There it is. If I had my little sticky note populated, I could have had some kind of a reason in here. Needs approval, whatever the case might be. Oh, sorry about my caps. Let's cross that out. Try that again. Needs approval. There, I hope. All right, so I will just simply get out of here. I don't need to do anything else here. Close that. Yeah, I want to save it. Now I got my little squiggly lines. Next time I look at that, I can see needs approval. But here's the point. Mem at this point stood back and said, okay, GP, this is your job. GP said, I'm searching a single database for a single vendor for a unique invoice number. I don't particularly care about this column over here. That's your creation. GP is exactly correct. Mem just stands back and let it go and do its thing. Now that's for inquiries. What's powerful is it keeps track of all this information for your age trial balance, whether it be receivables or payables. Again, we've modified the window. All your companies are there. If I take this and just say company 400, I can just go print, and in about 3 to 5 seconds, I should have an aging report for company 400. And there it is with all the buckets. I think you can have up to 7 in GP. So there's my buckets that we have in my configuration, the 32,000. You notice over here in the far left, all you see is all the 400s. Well, maybe I'm just going to close the report. Not the reporting window, just the report, and I'll change this. And I'll say, I needed 200 and 600 as well. Let me try that again. Hit print again. And now what I'm going to get, hopefully, is 2, 4, and 6. There's 2, there's 4, there's 6. A little more activity here, naturally. There's my aging bucket, different total account, and away I go. So obviously, I can group these agings any way I like. I can mark them all and do a combined aging for Ace Travel or any range I put in here, of course. But what I wanted you to notice is that I do all of this activity for all of my companies without ever leaving the window. And I can get an aging for any combination of companies that I like, let alone all of them together. Very, very powerful tool to allow you to manage these different entities, but without having the difficulty of managing separate databases and all the logins and logouts that come with that. Even for my 1099s, remember I showed you where we could store the federal ID number. Well, I go to print my 1099s. Once again, a little familiar box shows up here. I can mark them all. Now at this stage, you'll notice I've got the federal ID number showing everywhere. Very powerful. Mem simply goes back and picks it up from the table that you populated, brings it in here, and you go to work. Now here's where it gets interesting. I can print an individual 1099 per entity within my database. So in this case, Ace Travel would get 7 1099s. Or I can print one consolidated 1099 for Ace Travel. So he gets one 1099 for all my companies combined. your choice. However you set it up, that's how it will work, and away you go. So it's very, very powerful that way. We've even tried our very best to add in, this is if you're anything like me, I just love ad hoc reporting tools. I'm really a big fan of smart lists. If I go down to purchasing, these are the built-in, non-modified, if you will, by me personally, smart lists that come with an installation of GP. What we've tried to do is once you install the different modules of MEM, we try to add the entity fields in all the built-in reports. So you don't have to go around and make copies and edit and make backups and all that kind of stuff. You've got the built-in way to filter by company already built into your smart list, which is it's a minor thing perhaps, but I know as an accountant who used to use smart lists a lot, I find that really avoided a lot of nuisance for me when I was using that tool. So very, very powerful that way. Let's say I want to add a company. Now, I'm going to make a little bit of a caveat here. Let's say you want to add a company after you've installed and configured MEM, because there are a bunch of dots and switches and letters and radio buttons and all that you got to set up, checkbooks, etc. But I want to add a new company. You know, I got my 20 companies in the database or whatever it is, and I want to add something else. Basically, I go here to Financial, I go to Mass Modify, type in the count range, and it doesn't matter if it's alphanumeric or just in my case it's just numeric. Type in my account range. I could have put Z's in there. The company I want to create is company 7. Hit modify, and all these GL accounts will be created for company 7. I now go back in, once this 5 minutes or so runs, I go back into my multi-entity management. I walk down through my setup screens. I add the users, the users I need, the company 7. I walk back and I create my vendor list or my customer list or my inventory item list, whatever it is I need to add to that company 7, checkbooks, addresses, etc. If I've got the information in front of me, if I've already gone through and I know what checkbooks I want to create, I know all this information, I know what addresses I want to use, I can simply create a brand new company in about a half a day. It can be that fast. Now again, if you've got a very complicated setup, it might be longer, but an average setup with MEM, about a half a day, you could add a company to your company structure, no problem at all. Now, there's one other thing I want to touch base on here. I hopefully don't run out of time. Multi-entity management does have some restrictions, and those restrictions are because of the way the GP was originally coded. Not bad, just the way it is. GP will not allow you to have multiple companies functioning in a single database if they are using different functional currencies. Now, I want to stress functional because a lot of companies will use different transactional currencies, and that's fine. That's why GP has an exchange table built right in. But you've got to have one default functional currency. So if you've got a bunch of companies that are US dollars in their functional currency, you've got a few Euro companies, and a few Canadian dollar companies, for example, you cannot merge them all into a single database. The same is true if the companies have different fiscal year ends. We've tried in our programming to change that, but without actually changing the coding of GP itself, which is simply never a good idea, we can't do that. So if you've got different functional currencies, different fiscal year ends, you can't go into a single MEM database. The only other exception there might be if your chart of accounts is so very different. For example, my natural account for electricity in one company is not the same thing for my natural account for electricity in the other database, or whether it be some other kind of expense or whatever the thing might be. If your account naturals are different, radically different, you might not want to put them in a single MEM database. You could physically do it, but you might not want to. So if that's a situation that you face, we've got a brand new tool out, and I'm just going to give you something that alludes to it here. It's called InterCompany Bridge. And that InterCompany Bridge allows you to set up different databases and connect them through the bridge. They can be MEM enabled, so you may have one database with 4 or 5 or 20 or 30 or 100 MEM companies in it. You may have another database with a half a dozen Euro companies in it, another one with a half a dozen Canadian companies in it, and you may have companies that have no MEM whatsoever. They're just standalone databases for whatever reason. You can tie those together by enabling this bridge functionality here, and up here under InterCompany, enable InterCompany Bridge. And then you walk through some configurations. You're going to set up do, to, do, froms for the different company databases. You're going to set up the usual vendor lists. And then when you start operating, the due to froms will cross automatically to the other companies. You can synchronize your vendors, your customers, and your inventory items. You can choose to exempt some fields from synchronization. Think perhaps things like comment fields. Comment fields I have in one company might have no bearing on the comments in another database. So you might not want to synchronize those. Your choice. You might want to not synchronize unrealized gains or losses or realized gains or losses. You might want those all to roll up the head office. Not a problem. You can not synchronize those as well. But other than that, you can match all these vendors lists and customer lists and items together. What's very powerful about that is that you only have to enter, we'll pick on the vendors for a moment, you'll only have to enter the vendor once. You never have to touch it. If you go to change something in the vendor in a database that you're working in, there's configuration options to allow you to say, hey, you changed the contact name, for example, in this vendor. Do you want to roll this change down to your other databases? If you say yes, all the other databases are automatically updated so you don't have to go in to do it. So think of that. I enter a brand new vendor. I enter it in one company. I save that vendor. When I save it, it says, you want to add this vendor to the other companies? You say yes, and away it goes. No longer have to worry about that. You can set up your intercompany batches so that they automatically post through into the GL in the other database. So think of that one for a moment. I can turn around and do a transaction here. Maybe it's got an allocation ID attached to it, and it's going to put postings in other databases. I don't have to have somebody else at the other database waiting around to process that transaction for me to complete it. I can set it up to automatically post in those other databases. Now, if you don't want that, you can set it up not to. So somebody else in the other database can go edit the batch, makes whatever changes they feel are necessary, and away they go. You can do bank transfers between databases, whether it be US dollars to Canadian dollars, it doesn't matter. It'll look at the exchange rate table and simply process the transaction and put the proper exchange rate in place. So those are some of the proper tools that are coming along now with the additional functionality of the module called MEM Bridge, which has just been released, actually just being released this month. And that module is available with MEM. It doesn't require any particular modules of MEM to be purchased, just MEM Core, and away it goes. So very, very powerful tool for attaching databases that cannot be merged into a single GP database, but yet giving you much of the automated functionality that you would get if you had MEM installed and had everybody integrated into MEM. And just very quickly, a couple of other items that I want to show you just so you understand that it's not just purchasing that this product works in. Let's say I want to do my cash receipts. You'll notice by default I'm coming up to head office, so I could pick a number, an account here. Aaron Fitz is a common one that we use. Oh, yeah, it's okay. I don't need Uptime Trust. So I got First Bank automatically. I might want to do $5,000 with Aaron. Oh, my keyboard there's not working, so let's do it this way. 5,000, 0. Oh, back up. Now it doesn't want me to delete it. Hold on there a second, folks. Let me just fix this. 5, 1, 2, 3. There we go, and period. Okay. Now, right now, if you look at the setup, standard GP window, except for this company and description once again, it looks like it's going to go and do a cash receipt processing for Aaron Fitz for company 0. But I can open up the sub window that comes with MEM by following that little blue arrow, and I can say, you know what? I want you to apply this cash receipt to any and all companies that Aaron Fitz does business with in my database. And so when I would now go to look to apply this, what would happen, tell me what the default is, that's all great. What would happen is it would go down here and it would, all the invoices that Aaron Fitz had for all the companies, whether 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, etc., would show up here. The cash would go into First Bank, as we showed, and the appropriate due to froms for the cash allocation would be made to all the various companies that you would be using. So in receivables, works much the same way, whether we're cutting checks and payables, receiving cash and cash receipts. If I was doing a transaction entry here, you'll notice I get the same company description, the same allocation ID, everything looks the same as the payables window, but it's receivables. So the distributions will all work the same way, all the tax schedule IDs, whatever I have to have allocated to different companies, will all be broken out and allocated accordingly. If I'm doing a financial journal entry, I might watch my time here, it's already 1:45, so I'll only be a couple more minutes. If I take a look at my journal entry, again, it pops up and says, well, this is for company 0. But if I wanted to play with this, I'll just test it here just for the sake of playing here. I can have a journal entry that crosses over between multiple companies. So I've got 0006520, and it should make sense pretty obviously because it's the segment in the chart of accounts that's segregating and acting in all this activity. So if I go here and put this $500 in, and we'll do one more just for good measure, and 250, and then just balance that off to 300, and another 250 there. So I've got all my transactions in here. I'm going through 0, 1, 2, and 3, and if I click on my intercompany distributions list, it might not do it for me in this window because it doesn't have to. Okay, it won't show up automatically. That's all right. What will happen when I go to post this or save it to a batch? Actually, maybe I shouldn't have done that. I wonder if I can do it this way. Let's just try it and see if it allows me to do it. No, it wants the batch. Okay, so I'll put that back in. So at this particular point in time, or the reference rather, what would happen when I go to post this transaction is all the appropriate intercompany distributions, and that's just a bug I've got in mind. I can click that button and they would normally populate. So all those 1240s and 2240s would populate down here automatically because MEM is looking at this segment in the chart of accounts before it posts, and it's going to put the due to, due from in accordingly. As a matter of fact, if I went to post this, it would automatically populate in my edit sheet, and I can see the due to, due froms show up for me at that point. So whether I'm using financial, receivings, purchasing, or even if I'm in inventory or HR payroll, or if you use project accounting, whatever it is you're using, it's not a problem. Multi-entity management, can take care of that for you.